Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, my name is Muhammad and I'm the host of this podcast, which is called Divorce Muslims, a Second Chance. Season 1 of this podcast is sponsored by Muslim Marriage Services. The CEO of Muslim Marriage Services will be joining us later on in this episode, inshallah, to tell us more about them. This is an introductory episode and I welcome all of the listeners. So just before I start, I want to follow a principle of our religion. And that principle is essentially that if you have not said thank you to the people, then you have not said thank you to Allah. So with that in mind, I want to say thank you to a sister who invested in this podcast. Without her investment, we would not have been able to complete the first season of this podcast. She wants to remain anonymous and I will respect that. But what I will say though is, may Allah reward her in abundance. Now, before I introduce myself, let me set the scene for this podcast and let me give you some food for thought. Did you know that the most stressful and emotional time that any human can go through during their lifetime is when they have to deal with death, when they lose a loved one? And do you know the type of person that comes second on this list? It's when a person experiences divorce, and that is the magnitude of divorce. I want to focus on what I call the 2 G's, guilty or grief. The first question I have in my mind is, in the context of getting divorced, should a divorcee feel grief or should they feel guilty? Guilty would be feeling ashamed because one is divorced. In other words, guilt is associated with doing something wrong, whereas grief is feeling sad, pain and hurt because one is divorced. But grief has no connection with doing something wrong. The question is, should someone who is divorced feel guilty or feel grief? The difference between the two is essentially whether you feel you have done something wrong or not. This is something we will further investigate in this podcast. Okay, so who am I? I have been a part of running Muslim marriage events in the UK since 2018. For those of you who don't know, marriage events are a platform to help people get married. In addition to that, I've also been running a few social media pages all related to the Muslim marriage search. So over the last few years, I've had the benefit of speaking to many Muslims who are looking for marriage. I've got to hear about the struggles and challenges people are facing when looking for a spouse. So why am I doing this podcast? Well, last year, we held a marriage event and I remember traveling back home in my car. I was on a TikTok live and I was talking about the event that had happened earlier that day. At some point, a lady joined the live and she made a statement, and that statement was, there is not enough out there to help divorced Muslims find a spouse. And she then went on to pose a question to me directly, and that question was, can you do something for people who are divorced and looking for marriage? At the time, I remember saying our events are for everyone, including divorcees, and that maybe in the future we may hold marriage events specifically for divorced Muslims. And I left it at that. But the reality is, the statement that lady made never left me. There is not enough out there to help divorced Muslims find a spouse. And in all honesty, I'm grateful to her because it was that statement that has actually led me to the making of this podcast. So what is this podcast about? The aim of this podcast is to try and solve a problem that is connected to divorced Muslims. But before I answer the question of what this podcast is all about, I have to provide some context. I have to identify what the problem is before we speak about solving it. So what is the problem here? Firstly, let's focus on the word stigma. Stigma is defined as a strong lack of respect for a person or a group of people or a bad opinion of them because they have done something society does not approve of. This triggers the question, is being divorced accepted by society today, or has being divorced become more prevalent? My view is that generally, divorce is not accepted even in today's society, and I think there is a massive stigma associated with being divorced. So many times I've experienced people close the door on a potential purely and solely on the basis that the person is divorced. This happens regularly at marriage events. One person requests to take things further with someone, and we approach this someone and they say straight away, sorry, not interested because they are divorced. That means there is something in our society that connects being divorced to something negative. The question is, why? It is undisputed that generally speaking, Muslims are finding it difficult to get married in today's day and age. Finding a spouse is difficult if you are single, never married. It's even more deep if you are divorced, and even more complicated if you are divorced with children. The problem is that divorced people are judged by society, and generally speaking, the divorce tag is seen as a permanent stain by society. Now, I'm not a fan of challenging anyone's criteria when they are looking for marriage. So if someone says, I'm not interested in getting to know someone because they are divorced, that is their prerogative. As soon as someone says they don't want to consider a divorcee in the name of preference, then who am I to challenge that? But let's look at this from the other end of the spectrum. Let's look at this from the perspective of someone who is divorced. Imagine looking for marriage and imagine being told, I don't want to take things further with you because you have previously been married. The person doesn't even get to have a say. When being told something like this, it must kill these people from inside. So now that we have identified the problem, let's go back to the million-dollar question. What is this podcast about? Well, this podcast is all about divorced Muslims who are looking for marriage. I want this podcast to help divorced Muslims. I would go so far as to say that many divorced Muslims are oppressed by society. So I want to give divorced Muslims a voice through this podcast. We are going to have a divorced Muslim who is looking for marriage join each episode. And in each episode, we will explore 4 aspects with the guest. What happened in their previous marriage and what caused the marriage to end. What their marriage search has been like as a divorcee. What their opinions are around the stigma of being divorced and how this has impacted them. And finally, a mini profile, allowing them an opportunity to find a spouse via this podcast. If you want to be a guest on this podcast, then please email us at divorcedmuslims@gmail.com. Remember, this podcast is 100% anonymous. Anyone that joins will have their voice modified using AI, and they will have a code name. So you can join without the fear of being recognized, and you can speak openly. Therefore, in this podcast, we are going to analyze the minds of divorced Muslims. We are going to evaluate what divorced Muslims go through. We are going to see things from the perspective of people who are divorced. So what do I hope to achieve from this podcast? Put simply, I want all of the divorced Muslims who join each episode to find a spouse via this podcast. Their personality should shine through when they talk about their experiences and give their opinions. This, alongside their profile, I hope will generate interest and matches that lead on to marriage. But there is more than this that I want to achieve. I know this is going to sound crazy and impossible, but I do want to change the mindset around the stigma attached to being divorced. I want society to accept divorcees. I want people to change from saying, I'm not interested in this person because they are divorced, to actually saying, I know this person is divorced, but I still want to consider them for marriage. I know this is a difficult task, but we have to start from somewhere. I feel that the more we hear from divorced people, the more we will understand them. And the more we understand them, the higher the chances are that society accepts divorcees and ultimately the stigma disappears. Now people may be thinking, wait a second. I want to join this podcast, but I'm scared that someone will recognize me. Well, we have a solution to this. This is where this podcast is different from other podcasts, because each guest that joins will have their voice modified to an alternative natural voice using artificial intelligence technology, and also each guest will have a code name. So there is no way they can be identified or recognized. So this podcast is completely anonymous. This podcast is not about bashing an ex-spouse. We are not interested in who the ex-spouse is. Rather, we are interested in the anecdotal reports and experiences of divorcees. And also, we will be following what we call the golden rule when it comes to people matching with each guest for marriage. The golden rule is that only family details will be exchanged and nothing less. Once family details are exchanged, it is between the families and we are out of the picture. So that brings us to the end of this episode, and I want to end the episode by saying all that is good and correct in this podcast and anyone who is subsequently guided by it, this is from Allah and a mercy from Him. Any mistakes and errors are from ourselves, and we ask the forgiveness of Allah for them. Now, I mentioned at the start of this episode that we will have the sponsor of this season join us. Well, that moment has now arrived. If you are looking for marriage, divorced or not, listen to this segment. The sponsor of this season is Muslim Marriage Services, also known as MMS, and the CEO of MMS is now with us. His name is Brother Mustafa. Assalamu alaikum. Brother Mustafa, introduce yourself to our listeners.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. I'm Mustafa from the great city of Liverpool. My journey has been quite eclectic, from graduating in pharmacology from Liverpool University in 2001, then spending a decade as a senior specialist at Apple. I later read Islamic philosophy at postgrad level at Cambridge University. I am a marriage coach with over 20 years expertise in matrimonial issues and a former foster carer. I also have extensive knowledge and experience in childhood bereavement, SEND, child development, children's mental health, safeguarding, and guardianship. I come from a very prominent family, deeply rooted in the South Asian, medical, and Bangladeshi communities. My dad, an eminent ophthalmologist, scholar, and hafiz, passed away in 1989, leaving a legacy in both the medical and academic realms. My mom was an accomplished Bengali, Arabic, and Quranic teacher. I love cats, Liverpool Football Club, and Chennai Super Kings of the IPL. I'm a cultured explorer and have been blessed to visit 38 countries.
Thank you for that introduction. I mean, I'm not sure if I should say this, but I, very much hate Liverpool, the football club that is. But we won't talk about that right now. Tell us about MMS. What is MMS? What is Muslim Marriage Services?
Muslim Marriage Services, or MMS, came to life in 2018. We are the world's only certified social enterprise Muslim matrimonial brand. Our mission is simple but profound: to facilitate safe and ethical matrimonial connections within the global Muslim community. We're grounded in Islamic principles, and we are committed to ethical conduct and community responsibility. Our platform, muslimmarriage.global, operates on a digitally secure membership-based model, ensuring a trustworthy space for individuals seeking compatible partners.
Brother Mustafa, why MMS? What made you set up MMS?
Well, MMS was founded as a response to the growing Muslim marriage crisis, particularly the 42% and 31% divorce rates among British and North American Muslim communities, respectively. We aim to provide a premium, socially impactful solution through a sustainable platform that addresses the challenges faced by Muslims, especially educated Muslim women, in finding compatible life partners.
There's a lot of things out there to help Muslims get married. What I want to know is, what do you do differently from others?
That's an absolutely brilliant question. We distinguish ourselves through several unique features and services. A premium service where 50% of profits are either donated or reinvested by law, in line with Islamic values. We have trademarked social impact membership and Zenith premium plans. Rather than having standard silver, gold, and platinum plans, we're thinking very differently. We have a strategic partnership with Yoti UK, a certified B Corporation for digital ID verification. We also have patent-free dynamic guardian monitoring, which allows guardians to discreetly monitor family member profiles, matches, and calls for enhanced safety. We also offer optional enhanced DBS and extra documents for levels 2 to 3 verifications, as well as having a .global domain to appeal to an international audience rather than having a .com. We have the integrated Big 5 personality quiz for self-awareness and improved match compatibility, and it's also good for having a bit of extra fun on the system. We also have exclusive partnerships with mental health professionals and family and immigration legal services for our Zenith Premium members, as well as having very important telephone support. We also have a unique Abrahamic Guardian Interfaith Council that oversees MMS and promotes interfaith dialogue.
With all of that information now, how do we sign up to MMS?
Signing up with MMS is straightforward. Visit our website at muslimmarriage.global. All members pay a nominal €3 social impact donation, covering social impact costs and ID checks. Members can customize profiles with free premium filters and enable dynamic guardian mode for monitoring and safeguarding their profiles, matches, and calls. Members may upgrade later to Zenith Premium plans. We welcome brothers and sisters to call out to find out more information.
Thank you very much. So, as I said, if you're looking for marriage, then you have to join Muslim Marriage Services. That is a place to go to get married. Thank you very much to Brother Mustafa, and thank you very much to Muslim Marriage Services. So brothers and sisters, I hope you will tune in next week for the first episode of this podcast. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.